I was just a poor girl selling water, but somehow I touched the heart of a powerful millionaire. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I still remember that day like it was yesterday. The sun was blazing, making the streets shimmer with heat. And I was carrying those heavy jars of water as usual. My arms aching, my feet dragging in the dust. Every day felt the same. Wake up before the sun, walk miles with water, smile at people who barely noticed me, and hope I made enough to eat that day. I've always been small, thin, and well, invisible to most. But somehow, that day, I felt a shiver in the air, like something was about to change, though I had no idea what it was. He appeared suddenly, or maybe I had just noticed him for the first time. A man so different from anyone I had ever seen, dressed in a suit that glimmered in the sun, moving with that quiet confidence of someone used to being obeyed without question. I almost dropped the jars when our eyes met. Something about him made me pause, something I can't explain even now. It wasn't fear, it wasn't admiration. It was a mix of curiosity, tension, and a strange feeling in my chest, like my small world was colliding with something enormous. People passed us, but he didn't walk by. He stopped. He watched me struggle under the weight of my work, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not in the way strangers glance at you on the street, but really seen. And then, just as I was about to step forward, a man shouted at me from a distance, angry because I had accidentally spilled a little water on his doorstep. His voice was sharp, mocking, cruel, and everyone laughed. Even in that moment, I swallowed my fear, straightened my back, and tried to gather my jars without letting the tears come. And then he spoke, softly at first, almost like he was talking to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. "She's strong. She's braver than anyone I've ever known." I froze. No one ever said anything like that about me. Not my neighbors, not the customers, not anyone. That single moment, his words, made my heart pound, a strange warmth spreading through my chest, even though I was exhausted and aching. But things didn't stay calm. They never do. The man who had shouted at me moved closer, waving his hands in anger. I could feel my pulse racing, my jaws teetered, and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself. People were starting to watch more closely now, some whispering, some pointing. I felt trapped, small and powerless, but I refused to break. I had learned long ago that showing fear only gives others more power over you. He, the man in the suit, stepped forward, and something inside me shifted. He didn't just stand there watching. He came closer. His eyes, so intense, so focused, made the world around us blur. The laughter, the shouting, the mocking faces, they all faded, leaving only him and me, standing on that hot, dusty street. And then, it happened. He reached out, and I swear, for a brief second, the world stopped. It wasn't just about stopping the man who shouted. It was about being recognized, being defended, being seen as someone who mattered. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I remember trying to speak, to thank him, but no words came. My voice felt trapped in my throat, because this was bigger than words, bigger than me, bigger than anyone could understand, unless they had lived life carrying the weight of the world on their small shoulders, invisible to those who had power, wealth, or comfort. And then, just as I was about to lose my balance, the jars slipped. Water spilled across the ground, and I froze, expecting laughter, mockery, even anger. But nothing happened. He knelt down, helping me pick up the jars, his hands steadying mine, his presence giving me courage I didn't know I had. I glanced up at him, and our eyes met again. I saw something in him, a mix of shock, awe, maybe guilt, and a realization that the world he had controlled with money and influence wasn't enough to protect what really mattered. He was learning something I had known all my life. Courage, resilience, and heart are more powerful than gold. But the moment wasn't peaceful for long. The crowd murmured, some whispering angrily about a rich man helping a poor girl. I could hear their disbelief, their judgment. And yet, something shifted that day. Something fundamental. I didn't just feel recognized. I felt the first spark of change. Not just for me, but maybe for the way people could start seeing those they usually ignored. And even now, thinking back, I realized that everything after that day, the challenges, the fear, the tears, the laughter, began there. That day marked the start of a journey I couldn't have imagined. A journey that would test me in ways I wasn't prepared for, that would show me the cruelty of the world, but also the rare moments of humanity that can break through even the hardest hearts. I don't know if he knew at that moment how much our lives were about to change. I don't know if he realized that by stopping, by noticing, by helping me pick up those jars, he had started something bigger than either of us. But I knew, and I felt it deep in my bones. Something was coming. Something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about courage, survival, and the way the world sees people like me. And that's how it all began. After that day, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The man in the suit who had paused, who had seen me when no one else had. I walked through the streets carrying my jars, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying every detail, every fleeting glance, every wordless moment that had somehow felt like the start of something bigger. Life hadn't changed overnight. The sun was still hot, the dust still clung to my skin, and the weight of those jars still tore at my arms. But something inside me had shifted. I felt noticed. And for someone like me, that was powerful. The next few days were strange. I continued my route, expecting the world to remain indifferent, expecting the usual scowls, the mocking whispers, the people who turned their eyes away. And yet, I saw him again. From across the street, observing. Not shouting, not interfering, just watching. I froze when I noticed him. My heart hammered. Could he really be here again? Or was it just my imagination, hoping for connection where there shouldn't be any? And then I saw it, something that made my stomach twist. Another man, this one wealthier than most of the people around, walked up to me with a sneer. He shoved me lightly, enough to make one of the jars wobble dangerously, and laughed at my struggle. "Do you expect me to pay for all this? You're barely even worth the trouble," he said, smirking as the crowd snickered behind him. My hands shook as I tried to steady the jars, but my fingers felt weak, my body heavy. My throat tightened. I wanted to run, to disappear, to sink into the ground where no one could see me, but something inside me held firm. I refused to give him the satisfaction of breaking me. And then, just as things seemed unbearable, he appeared again. The man from the first day. He stepped forward, calm, confident, and firm. His presence alone seemed to draw the attention of the crowd, and the mocking laughter faltered, uncertain. He didn't shout or threaten. He didn't need to. Just standing there, he radiated a sense of authority far beyond wealth, a quiet power that made people pause. And in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't just helping me for my sake. He was confronting something in himself, something he had ignored for far too long. The injustice, the cruelty, the way the world treated those who struggled. But it wasn't easy. The wealthy man's anger didn't fade. He pushed back, his voice rising as he tried to regain control, claiming that the situation was none of anyone's business. I watched, holding my breath, feeling a mix of fear and awe. I didn't understand everything about the world of power and money, but I could see clearly what was happening. Justice, even small justice, was being carved out right in front of me, and it terrified me and thrilled me at the same time. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally stepped aside, his expression a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. I exhaled shakily, my hands trembling as I gripped the jars, my legs weak from standing so long. I glanced at him, the man who had helped me, and I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before. Something vulnerable, almost broken, like he was confronting truths he had avoided his entire life. I realized then that our encounter wasn't just changing me, it was changing him too. The days that followed were strange and new. He began appearing more often, sometimes at a distance, sometimes close enough that I could see the concern in his eyes. People started noticing too. Some whispered, some stared, some even smiled as if our strange alliance had shifted something small in their world. And yet, for every moment of hope, there was a reminder of how fragile it all was. I still faced mockery, cruelty, and indifference. I still carried those heavy jars, still walked miles under the sun, still struggled every day. The world didn't pause just because someone had seen me once. But slowly, things began to change, in ways I couldn't have imagined. He started speaking to people on my behalf, quietly, firmly, but without arrogance. He didn't demand respect, he showed it. And I realized something that made my chest ache with a strange warmth. He was learning what I had known all along. That strength isn't in money, or titles, or power. Strength is in endurance, courage, and heart. It's in the ability to stand when the world wants you to fall. And in that realization, I felt a strange kinship with him, as if our worlds, so different, so unequal, had finally touched in a meaningful way. Then came the moment I hadn't anticipated, the mom, and that would test everything I thought I knew about trust and courage. A storm of chaos erupted on the street. A group of men, angry at the attention I was receiving, began yelling and threatening. Some shoved me, some tried to knock over my jars. My heart raced, my hands shook violently, and my mind screamed at me to run, to hide, to escape this cruelty. But I couldn't. I couldn't abandon what I had fought so hard to hold on to. Not just the jars, but my dignity, my voice, my presence. And he was there, right beside me, shielding me, standing firm. I looked up at him, and for the first time, I saw no pretense, no wealth, no status, just humanity, raw and fierce. He didn't care about appearances, about power, about what people thought. He cared about standing for what was right. And I realized then that courage could be contagious, that one act of bravery could ripple out and change everything around it. By the time the men left, defeated not by anger, but by the quiet strength between us, I felt something shift inside me. I had faced the worst, and I had survived, not alone, but together with someone who had finally seen me. The street still burned under the hot sun, the jars still weighed heavy, and the world still had its cruelty. But I had hope now. Hope that even the smallest acts of recognition, courage, and kindness could start a ripple strong enough to challenge injustice. I didn't know what the next day would bring. I didn't know if he would stay in my life, or if the world would sweep us apart again. But one thing was certain. Nothing could ever erase the truth of what we had faced together. And deep down, I knew that our encounter, the danger, the fear, the courage, the connection, was just the beginning of a story neither of us could have imagined. A story that would test us further and teach us the meaning of real strength. The days after that confrontation felt like living in two worlds at once. On one hand, I was still the same girl, carrying heavy jars of water through streets that barely noticed me. On the other hand, I carried a new awareness, a fragile, thrilling sense that someone powerful had finally seen me, that someone had taken my side, that someone believed I mattered. And yet, this awareness came with a new kind of fear. Because when the world notices you, it also watches. And sometimes, the eyes that watch are not kind. I remember one afternoon clearly. The sun was relentless, beating down on my back as I balanced the jars. My arms burned, my feet ached, and yet I moved forward, step by step, because I had no choice but to keep going. That's life, when you survive day to day. You don't have the luxury of pause. And then I saw him. Across the street, in his usual place, observing. But something was different this time. His face wasn't calm. It was tense. His brows furrowed, his hands clenched slightly. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. Something was coming. It started small. A man approached me, one I had never seen before. Eyes narrowed, mouth twisted in that familiar sneer of someone who feels entitled to dominate. He didn't say much at first, just jostled my jars with deliberate force. I stumbled, my heart racing, my chest tightening. I could feel every eye on the street turning toward me. Some stared, some laughed, some whispered. The weight of judgment, fear, and shame pressed on me all at once, but I refused to let it topple me. I held my jars tight, swallowed my fear, and kept walking. Then he spoke, the cruel man, his voice loud enough for the nearby crowd to hear. "You think you belong here? Just a girl selling water? You're nothing." The words cut deep, sharper than any blow, deeper than the sunburn on my arms. My hands shook, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. Crying would make me weak in the eyes of everyone around. I swallowed hard and lifted my head, meeting his gaze as best I could. And then I felt it. Him. He appeared suddenly, moving through the crowd as if the world parted just for him. The man in the suit. The one who had first seen me. I could see it in his eyes. Anger, disbelief, a quiet fury that didn't belong to anyone so calm, so composed. He didn't shout or fight. He didn't raise a hand. He simply stood there, a barrier between me and the cruelty I had faced all my life. And somehow, that quiet act of presence changed everything. The crowd seemed to hesitate. Their whispers faltered. The sneering man took a step back, confused by the quiet strength radiating from someone so powerful, yet so human. And in that moment, I realized something incredible. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, strength is quiet. Sometimes, it's just standing there, refusing to let injustice pass unnoticed. But the danger wasn't over. The man in the suit stepped closer to me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was furious, not just at the cruelty directed at me, but at himself, at the society that had allowed such injustice to exist unchecked. And then something happened that I'll never forget. The cruel man lunged, trying to intimidate us both. Time slowed. My heart pounded. My hands gripped the jars tighter than ever. I braced for impact, for chaos, for something that might undo everything. And yet, he didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his hand. He just moved, steady, unwavering, and somehow, the air around us changed. The angry man froze, confused, uncertain. The crowd watched, silent. And in that moment, I felt an overwhelming surge of something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not a safety born of wealth or power, but a safety born of recognition, presence, and courage. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the man finally retreated, muttering threats under his breath but no longer daring to act. I sank to my knees for just a moment, my hands shaking, my chest heaving. And then I looked up at him, the man in the suit, and I saw something I hadn't expected. A kind of vulnerability, almost fragile, hidden beneath all the power he carried. I realized then that our encounter wasn't just changing me, it was changing him. And maybe, in a way I didn't fully understand yet, it was changing the world around us. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts everywhere. People moved aside more often, whispers became quieter, and some even smiled. But the most important change was within me. I had faced fear, cruelty, and indifference, and I had survived. I had carried my jars, my burden, and my dignity through it all. And more than that, I had someone who saw me, not for my poverty, not for my struggle, but for my courage and humanity. Yet even with this growing sense of hope, I knew that life could still be cruel. Every day brought new challenges. Every street held its dangers. Every customer a potential threat. But the spark had been lit, and sometimes, when the sun set and the streets cooled, I would catch sight of him across the road, watching, learning, and understanding in ways I couldn't put into words. That's when I realized something profound. The world doesn't change because of one act of courage. It changes because courage inspires more courage. Because one act of recognition, one act of standing up for someone who is ignored, can ripple out in ways no one expects. And in that knowledge, I felt stronger than I ever had. I still walk those streets. I still carry my jars. I still face cruelty and judgment. But I do it differently now. I carry a sense of purpose, a sense of hope. And I carry the knowledge that even the smallest acts can ripple into something far greater. And so, the story continues. My story, his story, the story of anyone overlooked, anyone ignored, anyone underestimated. It isn't over. It never will be. And as long as courage, recognition, and humanity exist in even the smallest measure, change is possible. The days grew heavier after that incident. Every step I took through the streets felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing my jars, my pride, and the knowledge that the world could crush me in an instant. But I also carried something new, a quiet certainty that I wasn't invisible anymore. That even in a world designed to overlook people like me, someone had finally seen me, and that someone was willing to stand beside me. It started with small things at first. People moved aside when I walked by. A few offered a polite smile. Even those who had laughed at me before hesitated, unsure how to act in the presence of someone who now had attention and respect, albeit in a strange, fragile way. And then, one afternoon, it escalated. I was delivering water to the usual houses when I noticed a group of men gathering across the street. They weren't customers, and they weren't neighbors. Their eyes were sharp, cold, and focused entirely on me. I felt my heart skip a beat, my stomach tighten. Something told me this wasn't just curiosity. I recognized the look from years of experience, anger, entitlement, a sense of ownership over the streets, over everyone they considered beneath them. I tightened my grip on the jars, my palms slick with sweat. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't. I couldn't abandon the dignity I had fought so hard to maintain, not after everything I had endured. And then I saw him. Him again. The man who had first noticed me. He was closer this time, moving through the crowd with that same quiet authority. His eyes scanning every person with focus, determination, and something I can only describe as controlled fury. I wanted to call out to him, but I couldn't find my voice. My chest was tight, my heart hammering. I was terrified, and yet, just seeing him gave me a strange strength. The men across the street began advancing. Their movements were deliberate, predatory. One of them shoved a small boy out of the way, as if to prove his dominance, and I realized suddenly that they didn't care about me alone. They cared about asserting control, about showing the world that their power meant more than courage, more than dignity. My legs shook. I wanted to collapse under the weight of fear, but I forced myself to stand tall. The jars were heavy, my body exhausted, but I refused to bow. Then the confrontation began. One of the men stepped forward, shouting accusations, mocking me, trying to provoke a reaction. He called me names, laughed at my struggle, and sneered at the sight of the man in the suit, who had now positioned himself between us. My hands trembled, my breath came fast, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I couldn't let them see my fear. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavier than the last. The crowd gathered, watching silently, some whispering, some pointing, some taking out their phones. My stomach churned. I knew any wrong move could escalate into violence. My mind raced. What if they pushed me? What if someone got hurt? My heart beat so loudly, I was certain they could hear it too. And then it happened. One of the men lunged, trying to knock over the jars I had carried so carefully. I stumbled, nearly falling, my body trembling from exertion and terror. But before anything worse could happen, he reacted. He stepped in front of me with such sudden force and presence that the attacker froze. He didn't yell. He didn't strike. He simply stood, unyielding, unflinching. And for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The air around us shifted. The crowd murmured. The other men hesitated, unsure how to proceed. My heart pounded as I clutched the jars, feeling the weight of every second, every glance, every breath. I realized then that this was a turning point. Everything we had faced before, mockery, indifference, struggle, had led to this moment. And now, the courage I had carried quietly for years was meeting the courage he had shown in those few days. Suddenly, one of the men shouted, stepping forward aggressively. My body tensed, ready to flee, ready to protect myself, ready to face humiliation again. But he didn't move backward. He didn't flinch. He stood firm, his eyes blazing, and something in his calm intensity made the attacker pause. It was a look that said, "I see the truth. I see her, and I will not let you destroy it." I felt something stir inside me, a surge of hope, mixed with fear, anger, and awe. I realized in that moment that courage isn't always loud or violent. Sometimes, courage is simply refusing to let injustice pass, refusing to ignore cruelty, refusing to let the world decide your worth without a fight. And somehow, standing there, trembling and terrified, I felt the full force of that courage. It wasn't just his, it was ours, together. The men eventually retreated, grumbling threats, defeated not by force, but by something far stronger: recognition, integrity, humanity. My knees almost gave out, and I sank briefly to the ground, still clutching the jars, my chest heaving, my hands shaking. And then I looked up at him, the man who had first noticed me, who had stood by me, who had risked the judgment of strangers to protect me. I saw relief, respect, and something softer, something vulnerable I hadn't expected in someone so powerful. I realized then that our worlds, so different, so unequal, had collided in a way neither of us could have predicted. And in that collision, we had both been changed. I had faced the worst the streets could throw at me and survived. He had confronted the injustice he had ignored for so long and discovered a courage that money could never buy. And somehow, in the middle of a hot, dusty street surrounded by strangers, something extraordinary had begun. A fragile but undeniable shift in the way the world could see us both. And yet, even as relief washed over me, I knew this wasn't the end. The streets were still dangerous. People still judged, ignored, and mocked. The jars still weighed heavy. Teeth would continue to test me. But now I carried something different. A spark of hope. A sense that courage, recognition, and humanity could ripple outward, even from the smallest, most unexpected moments. And so, standing there, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what came next, I would not be invisible. I would not bow to cruelty. I would carry my jars, my dignity, and my story, one step at a time, until the world could no longer ignore the quiet strength I had always carried within me. I can still feel that day in my bones, the heat of the sun, the dust on my skin, the weight of the jars in my hands, and the pounding of my heart like a drum in my chest. It started like any other day, but I knew, deep down, that it would be unlike any day I had ever lived. There was tension in the air, a quiet warning in the way people moved, whispered, and stared. My steps felt heavier, each one measured, careful, because I knew that the smallest misstep could bring disaster. And then it happened. A group of men, more aggressive than before, blocked my path. Their faces twisted with anger, their voices loud and cruel. One of them shoved me roughly, making a jar wobble dangerously. I froze, heart pounding, afraid I might fall, afraid of the humiliation that would follow. But even in that moment, I refused to cry. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I gripped the jars tighter, taking a deep breath, and held my ground. And then I saw him. The man who had first noticed me. The man who had stood beside me in moments when no one else would. He stepped in front of me like a shield, calm but radiating power, his presence alone commanding attention. The men hesitated, unsure of what to do. I could see the fury in his eyes, not just at the cruelty they showed me, but at the injustice he had finally been forced to confront. His silence was louder than any shout, stronger than any threat. One of the men lunged at us and time slowed. My heart raced so fast I thought it might explode. My hands shook. I was terrified, but he didn't flinch. He didn't strike back. He simply stood, unwavering, and the crowd seemed to hold its breath. The air around us was thick with tension, every eye fixed on that narrow street, every heartbeat pounding like mine. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes, courage is just standing there, refusing to let cruelty pass unnoticed. The man froze. The others whispered, uncertain, confused by the quiet authority he wielded. And I understood that this was more than a battle over me or my jars. This was a confrontation with every injustice I had faced, every person who had ever looked down on me, every moment of indifference I had endured in silence. This was the world asking, would courage and humanity prevail, or would cruelty continue to dominate? Slowly, the men backed away, grumbling threats under their breath. Relief washed over me, and I sank slightly to my knees, still clutching the jars, my chest heaving. I looked up at him, really looked, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Vulnerability beneath his power, empathy beneath his authority. He had confronted his own world, his own ignorance, and chosen to act not because of duty, not because of wealth, but because it was right. And I realized then that our encounter, this struggle, had changed both of us forever. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts all around. The streets didn't feel quite so hostile. Some people whispered encouragement instead of mockery. Others stepped aside without hesitation. And more than anything, I felt a new strength inside me, something I had carried quietly for years, but had never known how powerful it truly was. I had survived cruelty, indifference, and fear. I had been recognized, defended, and finally, truly seen. And yet, life wasn't magically perfect. The sun still burned, my arms still ached, the jars were still heavy. But I carried a spark now, a small but unstoppable flame of hope. I understood something that day, something the world often forgets. The smallest acts of courage, the smallest gestures of recognition, can ripple outward and change everything. That one man's willingness to stand beside me had altered more than just my day. It had shifted the world around us, in ways too subtle to measure, but too real to ignore. Looking back now, I understand the truth. Power isn't in wealth, or titles, or influence. Real power is in seeing the unseen, in standing up for those ignored, in refusing to let cruelty pass without consequence. I had always carried that courage quietly, and he had chosen to meet it with his own. Together, we had created a moment that would linger far longer than the heat of the sun or the weight of the jars. And the lesson, the real takeaway, is this. The world often ignores the struggling, the small, the overlooked. But every act of recognition matters. Every act of courage matters. Every time someone chooses to see, to stand, to defend what is right, it ripples out in ways we may never fully understand. And that ripple starts somewhere small, in moments that feel insignificant, in streets like the one I walked every day, carrying jars that were heavier than anyone could imagine. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know how many more challenges lie ahead. But I do know this. Courage, dignity, and humanity can change the world in ways money and power never will. And I carry that truth with me every day, as I walk the streets, as I carry my jars, as I face the world with eyes open, heart steady, and spirit unbroken. So I ask you, whoever listens to this story, how many times have we ignored the quiet strength around us? How many people carry courage unseen, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to stand beside them? And when that moment comes, will we step forward or will we turn away? Because I know this for sure. Someone noticing, someone caring, someone standing with you can change everything. And that's exactly what happened to me. That's exactly what changed my life. That's exactly what gave me hope when I had almost forgotten it could exist.